Welcome to our video introducing you to ongoing research from the Connecting Wildlands and Communities project. The focus of the team pictured here is on climate change and natural landscapes. We know that natural landscapes across the Southwest are critical to support diverse ecosystems and the many species across the region that rely on these functioning ecosystems. Across the Southwest, we also have densely populated urban areas that are surrounded by undeveloped lands. And we know that maintaining healthy functioning landscapes is critical to protecting diverse and vibrant built communities from fires, drought, and floods, which are disturbances that have all intensified because of climate change. Our team is exploring the complex linkages that link and connect wildlands and communities, focusing specifically on climate change, a long-term challenge to both wildlands and community health, carbon storage, a critical ecosystem service that wildlands across the Southwest provide to built communities, recreation, a non-consumptive use that connects wildlands and communities, connectivity, integrated land use planning that can support built communities and natural landscapes, both in terms of structural and functional connectivity, and also how we use planning and management to identify refuges across the landscape so that the landscape can buffer wildlands and built communities from a range of stressors. One of the primary areas of our team's research is on the impacts of climate change. Over the past 70 years, temperatures in the US have increased, and that's had a direct effect on birds, plants, mammals, and insects, and entire ecosystems as we observe distribution shifts, changes in abundance, and habitat type conversions. In the Southwest, we know that climate change is a growing threat to wildlands and built communities, and our team is contributing to the growing body of scientific literature on how climate is changing, focusing specifically on what this means in Southern California and the Southwest in terms of planning and climate change adaptation. For example, using historical data, EASA has been leading a project to quantify areas in SoCal that have experienced the highest proportion of extreme summer events over the past 40 years, to identify sites that have already experienced a high level of exposure to changing climate, and conversely, where sites are that have been buffered from climate change. As a next step, these data can be paired with downscaled regional climate models to project how this pattern is likely to change in the future. Coupled with other climate metrics, conservation planners and managers can use this current information that we've generated in our project to infer where single species or natural communities are already experiencing the highest level of climate stress and areas that can provide refuge from climate impacts. This information can also be used to refine conservation targets where exposure is high and can be used to identify and prioritize management to support adaptation at sites with changing climatic conditions.
Although a lot of our project is focused on adaptation to climate change, mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions, especially carbon, is also important. California has a goal of reaching carbon neutrality by 2030, and one component of that strategy is to look to enhance carbon storage in natural landscapes. The focus in California is mostly on doing this in forested lands, but much of California, and in fact the Southwest, is dominated by shrublands. To better understand how to quantify carbon storage in Southern California's chaparral shrublands, we've been working with the US Forest Service and UC Davis. Postdoctoral researcher Dr. Mark de Guzman has been working on methods to quantify carbon storage both before and after fires, as you see in the maps here, demonstrated from the US Forest Service EcoServe tool. With a better understanding of how carbon storage dynamics are affected by fire and post-fire regrowth, we can better integrate chaparral landscapes into planning to offset carbon emissions. Another aspect of our research is focused on recreation. Recreation is important to our community's health and well-being, appreciation of natural landscapes, and it's critical for conservation buy-in. But conflicts can arise from recreation, affecting habitat condition, populations of sensitive species, and even individual behavior patterns, all of which can pose a challenge to conservation planning and land management. In addition, these types of impacts can also limit ecosystems and species in their ability to adapt to climate change. To address this challenge that was raised by CWC project partners, we added an analysis of recreational impacts to our project. We did this using the concept of refuge to identify areas where it would be important to limit the impact of recreational activity to protect sensitive species and habitats that we're working hard to conserve in Southern California. You can see these areas in green on the map pictured here. Armed with this information, land managers and conservation planners can take a more proactive approach to planning for recreation, protecting sites that are important for conservation and identifying areas where they can provide equitable access to recreational opportunities that don't conflict with conservation goals.
And as Megan says, the need for recreation brings us back to a key aspect of our project, which is to find opportunities for conservation in a way that we connect the needs of human communities with those of natural lands. We see a pathway to create those connections by thinking about human and wildlife mobility across the landscape. For instance, in this map, Megan and collaborators identifies where habitat connectivity can be enhanced, so the remaining large protected areas are accessible to individuals and populations across the landscape. At the same time, this information could be used to identify where human communities can create better strategies for recreation that are enjoyable, but at the same time respectful of core areas for natural communities to persist. Finally, the diversity of drivers affecting humans and natural communities are complex. Therefore, as we incorporate climate warming in our decision-making toolbox, we must continue to consider those drivers of change, such as biological invasion, altered hydrology, altered natural disturbances, and human development. To do this, we have developed a framework to identify where the most stable conditions for multiple drivers of change are, so species and communities can persist under multiple drivers of change. Let me explain you briefly how this framework works. In the bottom axis, you can see the refugial value can grow from low to high. As we have measured climate change exposure, we can use similar metrics of exposure for different domains, such as fire, water, recreation, that here are pictured under the number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those may be specific for different landscapes. Then, after we have used different metrics for those specific domains, we can find places that have no refugial value, like in this example, as well as sites with high refugial value from all domains, like in this green example. The key then is to identify where these different refugial conditions occur in the landscape. And as I just showed you, you might have cases of extreme examples like no refugial value or all domains have high refugial value, but you may also find mixed refugial value conditions. Once you have identified those in the landscape, you can use a spatial analysis tool that can help us understand the resulting patterns and what those means for conservation. For example, we can assess how the super refugial sites, pictures in the dark green, are associated with existing protected areas. With this focus in integrated planning for wildlands and communities, and guided by partners and stakeholders, spanning from multiple boundaries and jurisdiction, and using a multidisciplinary approach to address climate impacts and our ability to adapt, we're hoping to produce models for science-based informed action that is repeatable and transferable.